Hey, welcome to Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. I'm here today with Thomas, one of the attorneys here at Shane Smith Law on the Concussion and Brain Injury Group. Today we're going to be talking about youth sports and the impact concussions can have on them, but also maybe some of the ways we're trying to prevent them. So Thomas, thanks for being on the show. And let's get into some youth sports. So particularly the one that comes to mind, once we knock football out, which we discussed in a prior episode, is soccer. Because soccer in the last 10 years has just really grown and seems like it's everywhere. It's on ESPN, it's in the high schools. It seems like soccer's just grown. And, it's not like football or martial arts where you're kicking people in the head or slamming into each other, but it's certainly not a no contact sport, right? Or something where you can't get injured. And I know people think about knees, but is concussions a big deal? Well, obviously concussions is a big deal in soccer. So let's talk a little bit about that. What can you tell us about concussions in soccer?
Yeah, when you think about youth sports a lot, I think the first thing that everyone's mind goes to when they think about concussions is football. So, that's so dangerous. And, they're just running into each other and smashing each other. And, if you think about football, it just catches a lot of strays there. And soccer just manages to scoot by because people aren't getting tackled in the true sense of the word.
Yeah.
They have their slide tackles and stuff. But this is another sport where concussions are a significant concern. Football gets the headlines because due to the nature of the sport.
Right.
Soccer has its own risks, especially you talk about heading the ball, whacking your head on a ball that's coming in 50 miles an hour, maybe faster, or collisions with other players, the ground, goalposts.
I was going to say soccer has evolved over the last 10 or 15 years where it's just everybody's better, is what I'm going to say.
Yeah.
So 40 years ago when I was a kid, it was sort of new, at least in the States or where I live, so the skill level was much, much lower. Now, soccer is everywhere. Kids have played soccer from the time they're 4 years old, all the way to high school. So that's 10, 15, 12 years of, coaching. So they're much better. Travel leagues, all that kind of stuff. So as the skill level rises, my guess is that risk of injuries goes up significantly because the players are better.
Yeah, you think about what we talked about before, bigger, stronger, faster. And you look at old videos of soccer and Diego Maradona, he looks like he's about 40 pounds over, well, maybe not 40. Look at somewhat overweight guy scooting down the field.
Right.
And you look at the guys now running around like gazelles. And
it's just a whole different game.
Yeah, a whole different.
And as they get faster and stronger and their techniques improve, injuries goes up.
Yeah, it's right up there. It's among the leading sports with concussion rates in youth athletics, along with football, basketball, and hockey.
Anything they're talking about, any specific measures coming up in soccer to sort of deal with this?
Yeah, there's been some efforts to make the game safer. For example, one of those is U.S. Soccer. They implemented guidelines that prohibit players 10 and younger from heading the ball.
Okay.
And also limits the amount of heading in practice for those between the age of 11 and 13. This is for the purpose, of course, of reducing those head impacts that could potentially lead to concussions. And along with that, there's a growing emphasis on education, like we talked about with coaches, players, parents, about recognizing those concussion symptoms and the importance of proper recovery before returning to play.
Now, soccer, unlike football, which is, I'm going to say, mostly in the United States played, soccer is played all across the world. Is any area doing a better job of concussion management, or is it just sort of there's room for a leader to come by and say, hey, let's make it safer for everybody, or how's that coming to play?
Yeah, I don't know that we have the data quite yet to know for sure. You would think that, maybe the United States, because we have some guidelines that are in place, but you just got to think about, is there reporting in countries where there's not as much capability to do that reporting and get that data as somebody who's going to collect it. So yeah,
I guess so. Ours is more centralized, or more. I'd say we just like more data.
Yeah,
I was gonna. For lack of a better word. So there's no. It's not like we can say, hey, in Argentina they're great at managing concussion of their players. So no, there's no clear leader. So it looks like it's an opportunity for the United States to sort of establish those hard lines and say, yeah, this is what we think the world ought to do.
Yeah.
So we've talked about in football, in the NFL in particular, if they think somebody's got a concussion, they're pulling them out through the NFL protocols. And some of the heads-up programs that they're pushing out through youth football, they're saying, if we think you've got a concussion, you shouldn't play. Is that trickling down into youth soccer as well, or is it just not there?
Whether it is or not, I think we're going to see over the coming years. I think what everybody's really concerned about is ensuring that athletes can enjoy the sport they love while minimizing that risk of injury. but the focus needs to be on health and safety and having those measures in place, like educating about concussions, the safer play rules, and just fostering that culture that we talked about with football that takes player well-being and their future as being more important than some outcome of some minor game, whether it's football or on the soccer pitch.
And I would feel like probably as the professional soccer leagues have continued to develop and grow, we're going to see more of that safety come into play, because soccer is treated as a more serious sport as opposed to when there were no pro leagues or they're very small. There's just not the money and attention and focus on it.
Right, yeah, as it continues to grow, I think we'll see even more things get more systematized, more centralized in terms of data collection, and just probably as leagues grow around the country, we'll just probably get more and more data to help influence what we do.
All right, now legislation, any governing bodies or even sports associations push anything down for soccer, or is it still in the developmental phases right now?
Yeah, it's a little bit broader than just soccer alone, but since 2009, every state in the United States has passed legislation that's aimed at protecting young athletes from the dangers of concussions. These laws are focusing on three components. We basically mentioned those. First one being education, second one, immediate removal from play if the concussion is suspected, and not allowing a return to play without medical clearance.
And are they pushing a lot of guidance for coaches and parents and referees on, hey, this is a suspected these are the criteria for a suspected concussion? Because to be honest, when I was a kid, the whole criteria was, can you how are your pupils? That was it. I mean, that was really all anybody ever talked about or was on TV. So what are we doing to help with that?
Yeah, I think they're trying to educate stakeholders in different sports on things like that SCAT test that we talked about for the NFL, just orienting, trying to get their orientation on where they think they are. It's like, hey, where are you? What time is it? Who are you playing? What's the score? Things like that can be where you're at. I played a little bit of soccer, and the only thing that they'd check with me when I took a header and got my bell rung and say, you okay?
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah, I'm good. Like, let's go. Let's go play, yeah. So I think there's an effort to get some of the knowledge that the NFL has brought in terms of those different assessments, to bring some of those to soccer and other use.
And how many questions you think would be on one of those on a day-to-day kind of thing? If I saw a kid take a hit, three question?
I think it's usually I think we talked about before, the Maddox questions, and it's just getting that general orientation as a baseline. It's like, all right, where are you? Who are you playing? What's the score? What team are you on? Different things like that, or what are we doing? We
could download that and we could put those together, but they're pretty simple. We could do a checklist like that, so if anybody was interested, they could just download it and say, okay, this at least gives me a starting point on knowing if somebody's in the game or not.
The workaround with that is, you'll probably see one of our other videos. You got Julian Edelman and Danny Amendola from the Patriots talking about, hey, I got rung up in one game, and Danny's running over to me and telling me, hey, we're playing the Browns, you're down 7,
here's the cheat sheet, huh?
Yeah, just see. So there's ways to work around that enterprising youth will certainly find.
And I'm sure they will. It makes me think, years ago, I was at a youth, and the kids were really, really small, and I showed up because it wasn't my kid, and I said, what's the score? And they're like, well, they don't keep score at this level in the league because we just want the kids to play. And then I said something to one of the kids, and they immediately told me the score and told me who won, and they knew everything. You know what I mean? Parents aren't keeping score, but they all are.
Yeah, that's right.
So, there's going to be a workaround that the kids will do, but it'd be a start, is what I say. At least they got to work around it, is what I'll say.
Yeah, they got to have the wherewithal to actually, be there enough to work around.
Have their buddy faked it, yeah. Like the answer. I know we're all worried about, kids and concussions, or at least we're very worried about it. And I know parents are worried about youth safety. We've got laws, guidelines. Do you think there's ever going to be a spot where we're going to shift over to, if we're in doubt, pull them out of the game, basically, like the NFL has? Or do you think that's not going to happen?
Yeah, I think that whole phrase we hear, when in doubt, sit them out. It's simple, powerful. It's a guideline that emphasizes erring on the side of caution when it comes to head injuries. It means is that if there's any suspicion of a concussion, the athlete should be removed from play immediately and not returned until cleared by a medical professional. I think that's crucial, because the signs of concussion can be subtle, may not be immediately apparent, but if you adopt this mantra and this kind of, motto for life in sports, coaches and parents can play a crucial role in preventing further injury, including tragic things like what we talked about earlier with second impact syndrome.
That's what I was going to say. This is exactly like that. Second impact syndrome would all be prevented if we were questionable. We pulled the kid out. They weren't another. Now, obviously, hindsight's 2020, or Monday morning quarterbacking or whatever. But I think that's where we need to get to. When in doubt, pull them out. Or let them rest and get checked out by a nurse or a volunteer nurse or somebody who can make that call other than just the kid themselves.
It's like, what's the worst thing that happens if you pull the kid out? I mean, I think that's a good question to ask. What's the worst thing that happens?
Yeah.
They miss a couple plays and they go back. What's the worst thing that happens if you keep them in?
Right. A lot of people worry about it, concussion protocols and regular folks, I'm going to say coaches, parents, implementing these. But where do the medical professionals come into play? I know we talked a little bit about Dr. McDonald from the American Academy of Pediatrics. As a medical establishment on board with this, are they fighting it? What are they saying?
Dr. McDonald, he's had some interesting comments, and it brings an interesting perspective to the situation. He's someone who's both a physician and an attorney. He's expressed concerns about the potential for concussion laws to create unrealistic expectations. And with that, he worries that even with proper evaluations and treatments, athletes might still experience complications from concussions. And this, in turn, could lead to a situation where medical professionals, they're seen as being responsible for any adverse outcomes, potentially resulting in medical malpractice cases.
So like we talked about earlier, I'm the doc on the sideline. The player gets a workaround by his buddy. And then I say, okay, you're cleared to go back on the field. And then you get second impact syndrome or something else happens and it's made worse. Now it's like, well, why didn't you catch it, right? Is that what he's worried about?
Yeah, I think you see situations like that, or in the instance of one of these other young men who suffered tragic consequences on the field. It's, maybe one of them, it was the initial traumatic brain injury that caused it. It's hard to really put a finger on that, and if the doctor's being blamed for that, that's it just gives us that idea of that balance that we're looking at.
I was going to say, yeah. So he's concerned about concussion laws. Everybody's concerned about, and like we said, you don't want to overrule it basically and suck all the joy out of sports and get rid of that, because I think we all agree it's great for our children. So what's the next step, I guess, or where are we at?
Yeah, I think if we just keep going back to that thought of having comprehensive education and training for everyone involved in youth sports, and that's not just in recognizing and responding to concussions, but understanding the nuances and limitations of medical evaluations and the unpredictability of recovery processes.
So sort of like the medical malpractice laws, a lot of the medical malpractice laws, there's an emergency room sort of escape hatch. It says if it's in the emergency room, they're given a little bit of leeway and bandwidth because they don't have a lot of options. Same as like a coach or a nurse or somebody out on the side of the field. They don't have all the tools in place to do a full diagnosis. They've got what they've got. So, the law shouldn't be used to penalize that person.
Right. Yeah, it's just creating that culture of safety that respects the complexity of brain injuries.
And understands it's not a easy thing to diagnose. I would say even doctors struggle to understand the complexity of a long-term concussion or a brain injury, which is why you sometimes hear, well, you just have a concussion, even for medical professionals.
And the advances that we have in terms of what we're learning every day. And, it's hard. You would think that everybody would be up to speed on that, but you see it all the time. Everybody has a responsibility to have continuing legal education, but does it always turn out like that in practice in terms of what people should know and do know?
And I think concussions, as we've discussed, everything we've learned is growing so rapidly and quickly. If you're not an expert in this area or don't spend a ton of time on it, maybe you didn't take the CLE that talked about concussions this time. And if you're a primary care doctor, maybe you just took a class on what you see a lot of, broken arms or
yeah.
So just because they've got continuing education doesn't mean a continuing concussion education this year or in the last 5 years, right?
Right, yeah. I don't know that there's any specific requirement broken down into subject matter. So it's, you satisfy your continuing medical education credits, and you might never have to touch neurology since you looked at it back in med school in 1988. So you're working off science that's 35
years old, right?
Ago.
And I know when my wife was a nurse, she talked about that sometimes. They have a stat delivery coming in and there's no labor and delivery doctor on site. They just ring for a doctor. You could get a cardiologist who he's a doctor or she's a doctor, but they don't know anything about birthing babies.
Oh, yeah, that's wild.
it just comes right into this. Thomas, I know we've dug down into concussions and how they're managing it in youth sports. I think this is a key topic for you. I know you've got some young children. I used to have young children. For our listeners, I think it at least gives them something to think about and look at those 5 questions. You know, it's just something that can be pushed out as we continue to sort of dig into this and talk about things that are coming up. For all of our listeners, this is Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. If this is a topic that interests you, hit a like and subscribe and hit the bell down below for notifications. And remember, if you're in pain, call Shane, 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane, 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.